Hey everybody, good morning. Goedemorgen.
Goedemorgen.
There we go. You would think that after 6 years my Netherlands would be a little better. The odd thing about learning a new language, I'll just say this as an aside, is that you find yourself at odd moments knowing things that you didn't know you know. So that, for example, I'll look at a sign, I'm like, oh, I know what that means. Like, well, where did I read that word? I didn't even study it. But anyway, so the language kind of seeps into your mind. Not like a toddler, because some friends of ours just had a baby and he speaks French, Dutch, English, I don't know, maybe Russian. He just speaks every language just because when you're at that age. Anyway, hello everyone. Those of you who saw me in October are probably familiar with me a bit. And some of you may know that I do appearances on YouTube with various programs, such as Millennials Are Killing Capitalism, which I think was probably one of the first appearances I made that sort of seemed to have an impact because Jared has a fairly large audience and features, as those of you who follow his work know, some very serious people, so I was honored to be invited. A little bit about me. So I moved to the Netherlands about 7 years ago with my wife. People say, oh, did you move to flee the United States? Well, no, because there is no escape from the United States, really. We just fled. We just left because, comparatively speaking, it was a bit more relaxed. Also, although the police are the same everywhere, there was somewhat less of a chance of me getting shot. Somewhat less, by the cops.
They don't get the same practice.
Yeah, they don't get the same level of practice. A traffic stop could end in a 9mm for me. So, and increasingly even for white people in the United States. So, but we moved, to have a somewhat more relaxed life. That's worked out a bit, although, times change. I have worked in technology for about 30 years, and starting, of course, in the States for multinational firms. And there's, if you have a political perspective, if you have an analysis, I'll put it that way. If you have an analysis, then your work life, whatever your job is, gives you data that you can use to analyze how capitalism functions at the ground level. Theory is important, theory is key, but you also have to have praxis. And our work life, and I tell people this every day, your work life provides you, even if you don't have a job, your experience of not having a job provides you with knowledge of how the system functions. So there's no reason to be shy. I mean, I'm sitting up here as if I'm some big expert, but every single person here has knowledge, and you can apply that knowledge of how you're experiencing the world, merge with the theories and the analytical tools that Marx and Engels and others have bequeathed to us. I think I'll mention it. I do a YouTube channel called Dialectical House Party, and in that YouTube channel, my colleague, my comrade Alchemy and I, who will tell you is proud Okinawan. He said, no, that doesn't mean he's Japanese, because Okinawa was conquered by the Japanese and then colonized further by the Americans. We apply the Vietnamese school of dialectical materialism, which takes Marx and Engels as a launching point, but then adds some of the insights of the Vietnamese school, which are in many ways quite different, very subtle. And so anyway, we do structured dialogues in which Alchemy and I go through this book that's from Luna Oy, which is a curriculum that's taught in Ho Chi Minh City at the university there. And I'm also doing an audio recording of the book, so which I'm finding a nice education. So anyway, it's a little bit about me.
Dwayne, very quickly, what's the name of the YouTube channel?
Dialectical House Party. Yeah, because it is a party. And we try to apply dialectical materialism and materialist dialectics, by the way. Dialectical materialism is the theory, materialist dialectics is the practice. We apply that to real world situations, including everyday life. So anyway, why are we here today? Why am I here today? It's not to talk about YouTube. It's to apply Marxist theory and praxis to understanding what is happening right now with the tech industry. I'm sure everyone and their grandmother and everyone has noticed that there seems to be, no, let me correct myself. Why do I use the American tendency to use modifying language? Not seems to be, there is a churn of activity, right? Madness activity, the construction of data centers at an incredible pace. People in the US, and this is spreading to other parts of the globe, of course, but as always, what happens in the US is covered more broadly in the global media, waking up almost, and realizing that companies are trying to build data centers in their communities, taking their water, taking their land, and so forth. And this has always been the case. In the US, there's an instrument the government can use called eminent domain, which allows them to just seize property. But this is being used today by corporations to seize vast swaths of land, vast bits of territory to build data centers. And there's a financial aspect to this, and there is a, how would I put this? There's also an indication of desperation. And this is what I think is often missed. It certainly is missed by the capitalist press, because they're not going to tell you that. I mean, there are people like Ed Zitron, who I consider to be, I mean, he's an asshole, but he also is a very useful source, because he will analyze and talk about the financials of the market. CNBC, various business press, Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, Financial Times, all of these, by the way, I do recommend that as Marxists you follow the business press, because this is where the rubber meets the road, as we say in the States. Is there a Dutch equivalent phrase for that? Does it mean the same, or like?
Oh, you mean to the phrase?
Yeah. Oh, okay.
The Finnish equivalent to the press.
Oh, okay. So yeah. So, but that the business press has to report as close as possible accurate data to their constituents, to their readers. This is why an old friend of mine who is in New York said, he would always read the Wall Street Journal before Fox bought it and it became terrible. But it used to be a really accurate way for him, as a Marxist, to understand what the corporates were up to and why they were doing it. So the business press today is reporting on the fact that there is no profit for so-called AI. And that companies such as Microsoft, and I focus on Microsoft because I have the most experience with them. I'm like, I think I used an example before, I'm like the scientist in a Godzilla movie who's seen Godzilla a million times, so knows Godzilla's habits. It's like, oh yes, I know, here comes the atomic breath. And Microsoft, which I'll focus on for a minute, recently announced that they are going to increase the cost of one of their services, Copilot, substantially. And this is something that business people such as Zitron were predicting like a year ago, and no one wanted to listen. And the reason they're doing this is because the material cost of running data centers is extreme, and they're not making a profit. They've been subsidizing what we call AI, what has been pushed on us. They've been subsidizing it to saturate the market, to control the market. In business, this is called a lost lead. Amazon used this in order to capture their market. Uber used this when, I remember 10 years ago or so, being in downtown Philadelphia, where I'm from, or in Manhattan, you could get an Uber for like $2, and I kept wondering, what's going on? Like what are the financials of that? But then it hit me, well, of course, they're undercutting taxi drivers. So they have capital, venture capital, and they're burning through it in the hope that they will capture the market and then make money. So that was the bet. It worked out for Uber, unfortunately, and it worked out for Amazon with Amazon Web Services, particularly, and their capture of the retail market. But it's not working out for so-called AI because there is no real use case. Now, I know people will say, well, I use it to complete sentences, or I'm a developer, and maybe I can use Claude from Google to help me in various ways. But that doesn't scale to the $1 trillion of investment and counting that these companies have sunk. But why have they done this? Well, let me see if I can see what I've done here. So a little while ago, where's my mouse? Let's take it over here. And is it scrolling? There we go. So a little while ago, this is my blog, by the way. And I don't want this to sound like some kind of self-promotional thing, but I did write this. So what are you going to do? So anyway, I wrote this piece. How long ago was it? What is that? Where is that? Okay, that was like, yeah, almost 2 years ago. My God. And trust me, I'm not that smart. So anyway, I wrote this piece on AI stagnation, foreseeing what we're seeing today. And the reason isn't because I'm an oracle. I don't want to use that word. It's horrible. Today. But anyway, in the ancient sense, I'm not an oracle. It's that I could see that there was no profit path, right? From a capitalist perspective, there was no profit path. But then the question I asked myself, again, trying to be dialectical, was why are they doing this? Why are they sinking money into this project? And you know what? So I can see what I'm doing. Let me change my view.
Do you want to keep using the microphone?
I think everybody can hear me, right? I think I have a big booming voice. All right, let me go over here so that I can see what I'm talking about. And I don't have to bend myself. Oh, thank you. Okay. Okay, perfect. So the thesis that I came up with, or the idea that I came up with, was that we can explain what's happening with the so-called AI industry by using Lenin's insight in imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. As old as that is, it doesn't matter because Lenin's theory of imperialism still holds true to this day. And Lenin's theory of imperialism is essentially, you can break it down. Well, before I get to that, let me talk about what I thought was happening at the time, 2 years ago, which was that companies such as Microsoft were trying to create a rentier situation. That is to say, they wanted to colonize other corporations, colonize their workflows, colonize everything they do by claiming that so-called AI could do the work. Fire your workers, AI can do the work, and then give us all your money. And then we own your workflow, right? We, being Microsoft, own your workflow. And so what I theorized at the time was that you could have smaller companies who were then selling so-called AI services to corporations. You know that many companies sprung up saying, we're an AI company. Well, all these companies were depending upon the tech stack, so to speak, of Microsoft and Google and Amazon and OpenAI, which is really just Microsoft, really. And that the idea was that they were going to then own those workflows and then have super profits. Because they're already profitable, but what they want is super profits, right? And that's what Lenin talked about in Imperialism, the Highest Stage, which was that capitalists, as they expand into financialization, there's no limit to what they try to achieve. And so they need imperialism to achieve super profits. And so this is a kind of internal, but Lenin also projected that it would have to turn back upon the imperial core at some point. And this is what we're seeing. So I came up with this little graphic at the time, which applied that to the tech industry, which was that the mutation from commodity production to competition to then you have a monopoly, which, let's use Microsoft as an example. Everyone's familiar with Microsoft 365, their cloud-based so-called productivity suite. Before that, Microsoft had the Office suite, which everyone's familiar with, right? Word, Excel, Excel's the most useful part of that suite, by the way. No one can escape Excel. I think the devil himself uses Excel for some purpose, but because it's the only good thing Microsoft's ever done. Anyway, they already had a near monopoly with that software that you would buy the box, you'd go to the store, or if you're a corporation, you would have what was called an enterprise agreement, and then you would get your Microsoft software, databases, productivity suites and so forth. Microsoft had already captured that market. So what they needed was a way of elevating their profits. They needed more profits, but they were in a monopoly position at the time, or near monopoly. There was always Linux and other things, but, and Oracle, had a stronghold on databases. But still, Microsoft maintained a near monopoly on the corporate market. How do you escape the stagnation that comes from monopoly? And my argument was that the first stage of this was by going to the so-called cloud. You go from buying software that you would pay a license for to then having a subscription service, right? This helped them for a time. For a time, when Satya Nadella took over Microsoft, he was hailed in the business press as a hero because he said, oh, Azure, Microsoft 365, and Microsoft's profits began to climb. So you could see that, from their perspective, they were making progress. But once again, you face the exact same problem as Lenin predicted, right? You end up with a monopoly position, which they ended up with Microsoft 365. Azure, they have more competition with AWS, obviously. But in this space, they're in a monopoly position, and monopoly always leads to stagnation eventually, right? So and here I just give some examples of the pricing. And then here's the video that I did. So the result of all this is that they're promoting AI, so-called AI, I always make sure to add that, so-called AI as a way to escape from the stagnation trap that they now find themselves in. This is why they are pressing so hard. Satya Nadella, again, to focus on Microsoft, who, by the way, is the CEO, if you don't know, of Microsoft, the one who was hailed as a hero only 5-6 years ago, he decided to do a massive bet on OpenAI. 10 billion, first I think it was $1 billion, then it was an additional 10 billion. And everyone thought, well, he's an idiot. But then what Microsoft also did, and they're a master of this, is they propagandized. You can replace your workers. You don't need, you won't need to pay for expensive software developers. And of course, that's music to the ears of capitalists, right? Oh, because of course, as we all know, they hate workers, right? I mean, despise workers. So if you want to make money easily from capitalists, all you have to do is say, you won't need any workers. And oh, sign me up. Where do I have to go? And so this has been the magic statement that Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and lesser gods have used to get business. However, there's a problem. And the problem is that in order to stand up this AI service, so-called AI service, they have to build physical infrastructure. It's not the same as simply saying, oh, here's a software that you can use. Software is material. It does have weight in the real world. However, it does not have as much weight as a data center that's required to host ChatGPT. And so if you're trying to expand, if you're trying to achieve this, right? If you're trying to achieve a monopoly position, again, to resurrect your monopoly position that you had with the software that you sold and then that you achieved with the software as a service, like the Microsoft 365, if you're trying to achieve those profits, you're trying to elevate your profits once again, you unfortunately, from the perspective of a capitalist, have to build something. This is the problem. You can't financialize your way out of this. You have to build data centers. And then in order to scale, to be able to capture as many companies as possible, you have to build data centers at an insane rate. So this brings us to what's happening today in which you see this mad build out of data centers, but capitalism is a casino, right? And so even though that is a material reality, what's occurring is that you have companies jumping into the market, such as so-called neoclouds. And what neoclouds do is, neoclouds are companies that will say, build your data center for you. Like, oh, I need an AI data center. And Microsoft is like, listen, we have billions upon billions upon billions of dollars. However, my God, I think Microsoft was spending something like, I don't know, 10, 20 billion a month. And so the board, of course, would go to Nadella and say, what the hell? I mean, I know we have more money than God, but that's a lot of money, brother. And so, I mean, even for us, that's a lot of goddamn money. So, so he said, well, let's outsource this. And I've neglected to mention the role of NVIDIA, which is the one company that's making money from all of this, because they make the so-called game processing units or graphic processing units, the GPUs, that are used for the models. NVIDIA is now, realizes this, Jason Wong, who's the CEO of NVIDIA, realizes what's going on, because he's not a complete fool, and so he's like, well, what we'll do is, we'll invest in a neocloud that will then build the data center, and then, and then we'll say that there's growth. So then you're able to project to the world, to the business press and to you and me, that AI is growing at a crazy rate, but all of the so-called growth is a churn of activity amongst these people, right? Because even though they're pushing it on us, really, we don't have that much of a use case for it, beyond, a few things, but certainly not something that matches, as I said, the trillion that they've spent. So finally, I want to add one other element to this before I stop talking, and that is the role of the aggression against Iran and the consequences of that aggression, and the fact that Iran has proven itself to be extraordinarily militarily capable, which I think shocked the West. I remember when I was reading, there's an Iranian who I follow on Twitter. I only stay on Twitter now because there are a few people who, number one, because Palestinians are still there, and number two, because there are people, in addition to Palestinians, who still communicate as best they can from the zone. There are people in other parts of the world. And this particular fellow from Iran was saying, and it was all confirmed later by the capitalist press, that I think in the first few days, the Iranians managed to destroy the first tier of American bases. And I remember reading this and going, holy shit, what? So they wiped them out. They wiped these bases out. And in the recent attacks, of course, against Iran, which the Trump regime staged, as you know, attacks against the Karg Island and some other areas around, trying to intimidate and trying to destroy, the Iranians responded immediately. This is unprecedented, unprecedented. It took Vietnam decades to develop the capacity, right? And so Iran is benefiting from the work of others and their own internal work and the fact that they have encouraged science and technology. And I'll say one more thing about that before getting to this. In our circles, we tend to associate the development of weapons and things like that with Lockheed, Raytheon, and other evil bodies. But we do live in a world in which it is necessary to defend yourself, right? And science and technology belong to everybody. And what our nations have tried to do is say that science and technology only belong to white people and only belong to the West. And what Iran has said is, no, science and technology belong to us for national defense. You can develop a missile, not to mention what Hezbollah is doing, my God. So, anyway, what has been the consequence of the aggression against Iran for the tech industry? This graphic I created this when I was on Millennials with Jared, or for Millennials with Jared. I read it was in the business press. I read a story in which, I forget his name now, but Sequoia Capital, which is a major investor in the tech industry. And let me just, so I'm not sitting here like I'm in my,
5 minutes.
okay, I'll be done in a few minutes. So the lead for Sequoia Capital recently said, only a couple of weeks ago, he said, we thought the tech industry rule the world. We thought, software is eating the world. That's the phrase that they were using for decades. But we discovered, this is this fellow from Sequoia Capital, the venture capital firm, we discovered that no, tech exists with other capitalist enterprises. And, and the most important of them being the oil industry. And so in this graphic, I think that was Sequoia Capital talking. In this graphic, what I showed is that all the inputs for the tech industry, so the constraint of hydrocarbons via the Strait of Hormuz, and maybe even the other strait, which Ansar Allah, I believe, has closed, the constraint of hydrocarbons has had a direct impact upon the tech industry's capacity to do what it's trying to do. In other words, diesel generators are used to power some of these stand-up data centers. Even some of the data centers are intense, for God's sake. This is how rapidly they're trying to build these things. Plastic, of course, is all hydrocarbons. Manufactured chips is dependent upon hydrocarbons. The transport of equipment, and of course, as I just mentioned, power. So the tech industry is now facing an even greater crisis. There's a financial crisis, there's a material crisis, and now there's a geopolitical crisis. So I guess I would close this off by saying that our responsibility is to explain not only to each other, but to those to people in our circle who may not have these analytical tools, why this is happening. Because this is an opportunity to open people's eyes to what this structure, this superstructure actually is, which is not a fun and games set of companies that make fun tools. I mean, this is just a spy device ultimately. But rather, one of the key elements of capitalism, and a capitalism that has entered really, truly, I mean, people have been saying this for a long time, I think, truly has entered a real period of crisis.